very much, Harriet. And going to Rushanara, please.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to follow up on some of the questions the chair's already raised. The first one being about the fact that we're heading to a year since the schemes were introduced, and as he pointed out, the RFS described it as rough justice, the way that some people have been treated. In the light of that, are there any other things, obviously we've seen the Northern Irish experience, the Scottish experience, where there's a will, there's a way. Do you think that the UK government, the Chancellor in particular, could be identifying ways of addressing those who are left out? And if so, what else? Should we be doing similar things, or are there other things we could be doing? And we've heard reports that 1 million people have said, who are currently self-employed, that they would consider leaving self-employment. Could all of you consider the question of what the economic implications, wider economic implications are? One of you referred to this being this damaging entrepreneurship. What are the wider implications of people switching?
Who would like to
start? Richard, do you want to start?
I can. Shall I? Let me deal with your first question, if I may, about doing more in relation to those who are left out. And well, I suppose to a large extent, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I said. It was understandable perhaps in the first few periods, but now we've moved along. We've seen the emergence of other schemes. It is also just even preparing for this afternoon and looking at the other support that's available to businesses and individuals. It is, whilst there's a good tool on gov.uk, it is quite hard to track. So if you've got premises and you've received a £9,000 grant, or if you run a pub and you received a £1,000 Christmas sort of bonus, for want of a better term, it's very hard to then narrow down who is left out in the population who hasn't received anything, or who hasn't received sufficient. And I also think that now Scotland and Northern Ireland have moved with their newly self-employed schemes, it probably makes it more difficult to do something for the rest of the UK, because you're then having to decide whether you're willing to give people funding twice, or introduce a further complexity, which is to then have to deduct any other support that businesses have received from elsewhere. And when the Scottish newly self-employed grant scheme was launched in sort of spring, summer last year, there was a long list of exclusions, which meant you couldn't claim the grant if you were eligible for any other COVID support. So as time goes on, it actually becomes more difficult to target a scheme effectively. In relation to the second question, I think probably the witnesses in the next session are better placed to answer that than we can.
Okay. Caroline, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll just come in in terms of other schemes. I think we do now have a lot of different local schemes and different grants, across Northern Ireland, Scotland, but even some, the English local authorities. There are a lot of different schemes, and I think there is no one solution to this. The people that miss out fall into a huge number of different categories, and you have to either look at potentially a new scheme, or there's a limited amount you can do by tweaking the current schemes. But actually, some of the local schemes where you're really targeted may be the way to go. The one thing I would say about the Northern Irish and Scottish schemes is I don't see them as being scalable. I don't see it as being possible to do those on
some would argue at least they're doing, so wouldn't some people argue at least they're trying, at least they're doing something, whereas our Treasury is being very stubborn this committee published a report. The chair has written time and again. We've all made representation across the House in different parties as well. Is it political will? Is there a way of at least offering some solution for some people that's not being considered, that should be considered?
Well, what I'm saying is, I think they are by their nature local schemes. I don't believe they could be done on a national scale, because They require the taxpayer themselves to provide significant amounts of data and documentation and evidence, and it requires the the authorities.
So what is it
themselves are doing an awful lot of checking of that data, which is
Scotland. I mean, these are national schemes, Scotland and Wales. So what is it that they're doing that we are not capable of doing? You know,
it's a question.
They're implemented locally.
It's a question of scale and the amount of resource required to check the very considerable amount of data and documentation that they're asking the claimants to provide. And there's also a cap on the scheme, on the amount of funding.
Okay, thank you. And on the second point, do you want to add, did you have anything to say on the 1 million who are likely to leave self-employment? Do you have a view on what that might mean for the economy, if anything?
I would echo what Richard's comment.
Okay. Glenn, did you want to come in on this point? If
sure.
not, that's my next question.
I mean, I think there is two aspects to this. As we've mentioned before, there are groups that have been forgotten and quite clearly forgotten. There are also some amazing and brilliant initiatives out there. I mean, in Wales, the Economic Resilience Fund was excellent, but was actually oversubscribed, ran out of money very, very quickly. And an awful lot of businesses who had looked at that had then invested time and effort in preparing their case and their documentation, actually found out they'd done that for no benefit. So there can also be some feelings around people being left out by something has disappeared and has gone. You know, a great initiative, but actually it needed more funds. It needed something which looked at how that would be rolled out. But I do go back to, there are some core groups out there, directors being one of them, and actually the extension of SAYS going forward that should be looked at. In terms of your entrepreneurs going forward, we've seen some of that anecdotal evidence, and I had a look. I know there was one piece of research from a university, but I've been unable to find that, which showed that the number of students looking at or considering becoming entrepreneurs and business people going forward had declined during part of this pandemic. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find that for the committee session. But that is, I think, a significant concern for all of us going forward.
Yeah, because historically, we know that in a number of recessions, self-employment has been an important driver towards recovery. I mean, through the 80s and 90s. So is that an area you think that we should be looking into more closely to see what in this experience, particularly in terms of a lack of support, might drive people to be wary of becoming self-employed, and what could be done to make sure that those who, you know, where self-employment is an important driver for economic recovery, and small businesses, of course, are very crucial, that the Treasury understands better how they can be incentivized to do that.
I would fully agree. I think you need those business leaders who show that entrepreneurial spirit, but actually also those who look at building their businesses going forward and employing more people. And as an international organisation, you would expect me to say this also for our growth internationally, looking at some of those business and export opportunities, which if you're a small business owner, you may not be able to dedicate the time to that. So I think there's an awful lot around the opportunities out there that we can look at and explore further for our businesses.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, which is about there are some reports. One report last year, last October, that suggests that 1.3 billion pounds was handed out to workers who saw no loss of income through, you know, who are in the SEIS category, while 500,000 people were left with no support, having lost their jobs. Do you think that given that happened, and of course, you know, everybody recognises that the government had to act speedily in the first wave, do you have a reaction to that, and what can be done going forward to learn the lessons from getting getting government interventions better targeted so that those who need it get the help and those who don't need it. And clearly that particular figure is pretty concerning, because if your income hasn't actually gone down, there's no reason to be given taxpayers' money. Do you have a view on this? Caroline, do you want to start?
Yes, I mean, I think this is where digitalisation comes in. I think there would have been considerable scope for government to be much more targeted in how it provides support, and that would actually, that is in terms of both filling the gaps of people who haven't got support and perhaps should, but also avoiding giving support to people who perhaps didn't need it. And I think HMRC has made this point in its 10-year tax administration strategy document, that better data, more up-to-date data would have enabled much more targeted support. So I do think, we all hope that this won't need to happen again, but that is how you do it.
Glenn, do you want to come in, and then Richard, and then my time's up?
Yeah, I mean, I would also add on to what Caroline has said, that there are some declarations there that actually HMRC asked those who are making those declarations to say their business has been affected. But some of that isn't clear in terms of record keeping, in terms of actually what a person needs to do going forward to say or prove that how they've been affected running through there. So I think there is also a job for HMRC to make sure that they make it clear that there's information you need to keep, but actually how they will use that, because the declarations on their website can be rather vague and say you might need this, you might need that. It goes such as, but actually doesn't make it clear that we might require this information from you, we might require that proof for you. And we will face as professionals and professional bodies, and our members will face many of those cases where people might come through and have got a grant, which is obviously taxable, but actually from the initial evidence, we can't see any reason why they would have applied for that grant. So that has some practical implications which run through all of us who provide support and advice going forward. So I think HMRC could do with some better declaration.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to come in quickly?
Yes, and very quickly, I think there are probably two categories to consider. Those who claimed who weren't entitled to the grant, and those who perhaps claimed more than they needed, for want of a better term. Now, I think those who claimed who weren't entitled, first of all, the eligibility checker that businesses went through sometimes got what you might call a false positive, because it was based on known information to HMRC. So if somebody had ceased being self-employed, they would still potentially be told they were eligible to make a claim, even though they would fail that test. And also the claims process itself was very sort of affirmative in nature, in that it just took you through the steps without giving big red warnings which said, do you meet this test, do you meet that test? If not, you're not entitled. So I think the process could do with looking at. And I think on the financial impact, I think it was because the grant was an all or nothing. And even if you'd lost, a few £100 or something, you met the requirement of being financially affected. And so you were entitled to whatever the system calculated you were entitled to claim. And you couldn't really say, I don't need all that. You can make a voluntary repayment now, but some mechanism even to just limit how much you claim might have been helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's overly generous in this case, and yet we have welfare that's very, £20 is being, argued about when people are on the breadline. And it seems, certainly in my constituency with the highest child poverty rate in the country and people on the breadline, it just seems incredibly unjust when £1.5 billion could have been put to those who are in greater need. I'll stop there, but thank you very much for your contribution.